Look at that, we're live.
It worked.
We did it. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to A Week in Watches, episode 104. Tentatively titled this, We Live Again. It's like, because we're live and we live again. Okay. Obviously, I'm joined here by Griffin Barsh, contributing editor. How you doing, Griffin?
I'm doing great. We've had a nice day in the office, doing a bunch of video stuff that you'll all see soon enough. And
yeah.
Now we get to talk about new watches. So there are no better way to spend a Wednesday night.
Yeah. I like that premise. This is how you should be spending your evening, is talking about watches. Yeah. We have a, good episode planned. I'm trying to do these probably every 2 weeks, I think, is a good cadence for A Week in Watch, is what I've found, because let's get a little news built up, you know? So we have a nice range of things, from Seiko to Moser and, I don't know, a bunch of other random things. I think it's worth doing wrist checks since we are here and we're live. And this is actually a relevant wrist check as well. So.
Yeah, because I'm wearing a watch that is not mine, but rather one of the watches we're going to talk about today, which is the new Shadow Zenith Defy Revival Diver, which is a fantastic thing. It's both really dark and really bright. And I don't want to get too much into it now because we're going to talk about it in a bit
later, but was very taken with this watch, honestly, when I saw it earlier. Kind of surprised, to be honest, how much I like that one. I have on Hebring Yosef. This is a new one for me. This has a cool set of functions on it. It's a regulator with a dead stop seconds and a power reserve, which is, I think, the only watch that has that set of complications.
It's certainly the only watch you're going to find with that set of complications at anywhere close to that price point.
Yeah, it's the dead stop seconds that really kind of sets it apart with the regulator. Because that is like the weirder kind of aspect of it. Obviously, there's a lot of regulators out there, but probably one or two with the power reserve.
And Debbie second, I mean, it is absolutely one of my favorite. Would we call it complications? It's definitely one of my favorite functions on a watch.
Yeah, I like to call it deadbeat seconds. Some people call it jumping seconds. It is. Before I had a jumping seconds watch, dead stop seconds, which I have another Hebring, which has dead stop seconds. I have the Irwin. I thought, well, this is kind of silly because it's like you try so hard to get these wonderful mechanical watches and their beautiful sweep, and then you go back to the thing that's like the telltale sign of a quartz watch that can kind of irk people. But then because it's mechanical and it's extra, it somehow is cool again.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of it sort of reminds me of Aston Martin spent all this time. They went to the single clutch automatic gearboxes, then the double clutch automatic gearboxes to make the cars faster and faster and faster than the manual cars that came before. And eventually when they started making their really high-end one-offs, those are all manual because that's what people want. It's just, it all comes back to zero.
It all comes back to zero. And it actually makes a lot of historical sense on a regulator, because you actually want to be able to tell the second on the second, because they were historically, regulator clocks were used for setting the time on other devices. So, look at that, a whole history lesson.
It's also just a really good-looking watch.
It is. It's a very attractive watch. They really did a great job. Hebring too, not a brand that gets enough press. It's a real insider brand, and that's partly because they don't seem to care about press.
Yeah.
They're really they don't send out press releases. Nobody even knew this came out. I just am a nerd for them, so I look at their stuff a lot. They don't even update their website very often. The best set of images on the internet of Hebring's watches are on Horology. Oh my God, I'm messing up his website. I'm gonna look this up so I don't mess this up.
But yeah, no, to your point,
Horology by the Sea.
Yeah.
Who is a U.S. distributor of the brand. Best photos.
Yeah, but they don't need to. They get the interest they want. And I think you can see that by when you go to watch events, how many people actually have them on. Mm-hmm. They actually pop up in person. And granted, we see a lot of watch people, but they pop up in person a shocking amount.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, hopefully there'll be more Hebring soon. But before we move on, I'd love to give a little shout out to the Wind Up Watch Shop here. They'll be our sponsor for this episode. At the Wind Up Watch Shop, we have recently brought in Formex watches as well as Robot watches. Robot from Czech Republic, which is a very cool brand. Zack Kazan actually went there last year. We have some content about that brand. Totally unique. They do some cool stuff. And both of them not only are available online, but also in our Brooklyn showroom, which is open. And for the summer now, we have new hours Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, 12 to 6. So come on by. It'll be a fun time in our office, of course, and any of the details about the address and everything you can find on windupwatchshop.com. And, also, if you can't make it on those days and there's something you want to see, you can set up an appointment with our team. So.
Yeah, and as you head into a New York summer, it's also worth remembering they do have air conditioning and it works. So come get a break from the brutal heat and buy a watch.
Yeah, I like it. That's a good pitch. There's also like a microbrewery across the street, make a day of it. So, all right, should we get started with the first watch?
Yeah.
All right. So the first watch we are looking at is the Seiko SPB497. So this is a new Presage model that came out, and this is part of this sort of artisanal collection of Presage models that features an Arita porcelain dial. But for the first time, it's unglazed, which is interesting. So it has sort of like more of a matte texture to it. And then as you can see, they also kind of imprinted a pattern into this, which really kind of brings some interesting Seiko sort of techniques together. Obviously known for patterns, but then also this porcelain dial thing, which is a very cool Presage, like something that's unique to Seiko Presage. What do you think of this one? Yeah.
I think it's really appealing. I think these watches, it feels like a bit of a throwback to a Seiko that existed maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Like it feels very Presage. It reminds me a lot of kind of some of the cocktail time stuff, and it always with the Seiko porcelain dials, regardless of how they photograph, which they don't always photograph amazingly well, they look so good in person, and they look like a step up from where you might expect them to consistently. And I have no reason to believe that this wouldn't be the case as well here.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely looking forward to hopefully running into one of these in person, porcelain. That dial, like you can kind of see in the pictures, it looks like it has like an interesting warmth to it, like to the white, maybe that's because it is unglazed. But also the gold batons and hands might be sort of casting a little bit of a warmth.
Yeah. I also think there's something to the case finishing is at a slightly different level than we're used to seeing from kind of the Presage dress watches. There's a little bit more faceting and contrasting finishing going on. So I'm really curious to see how these feel in person.
Yeah. And there's like obviously been a lot of conversation about Seiko sort of moving up market. Yeah. I think in the last couple of years, actually, we'll probably talk about that again later. But these, as they have like an element of craft to them, feel like they should cost more. And this watch is $1,850. I don't actually remember where the last porcelain or Urushi dial watches were, but they were definitely over $1,000, and so it's not too far off. But this feels quite like worth it. I mean, this is an uncommon thing to find, certainly, in a watch. And now it kind of sets sort of an interesting set of tiers. So you have the under $1,000 Seiko, you have the Prospect, you have these kind of craft Presage watches, then you have the King Seiko, which is now like a little bit above that, and then you can kind of run into Grand Seiko from there.
Yeah, and I feel like, once again, like Seiko has done a really good job, and it's hard to think of another brand that does this where you really can run up the whole price ladder with them. There's always that next step. And this does fill what has weirdly been kind of a gap in that strategy.
Yeah, for sure. We just saw actually a comment popped up calling this the golf watch. And you were saying that right before we started, that this reminded you of a golf ball.
Yeah, it undeniably, like just the dimpling, you can't avoid with the combination of the dimple and the white, it's gonna look a bit like a golf ball. Yeah. But also, there's nothing wrong with that. Like you get to the end of a nice round, it's not like you need to wear a sports watch while you're playing. Throw this on for the 19th hole, have a beer, talk about your round, and then go home wearing a nice Seiko.
There you go. I mean, it might be like mini golf for me, but with golf, there's like a shock concern, right? So imagine a porcelain dial might be the last watch you'd want to wear with
probably
playing golf, but we'll leave that to someone else to test.
Yeah, but you know what? Like, just throw it in your bag for the round. If you shouldn't be rushing through your round anyway. Enjoy your time outside, whether it be mini golf or real golf.
Well, mini golf's not real golf. Okay. So just a couple more specs about this watch. It is 40.6 millimeters by 12.5 millimeters tall. It's no date, obviously. It has a 6R51 caliber in there. That's the newer 6R. And they make that very clear by having automatic 3 days on the dial. I'm not a huge fan of that. Where do you stand on the automatic 3 days text?
Honestly, my biggest problem with it is just that it's wider than the presage text. It just looks a little, I want it kind of to be, I want the text to get smaller as you go down, not the other way. It's a little odd, but it's also Seiko. They put words on the dial. I got over it a long time ago.
I'd rather it said like, porcelain or Arita or something, but hey.
I mean, if we're going for what I'd rather just say nothing, but.
Fair enough. These are limited to 1,200 pieces, priced at $1,850, as we said, and they'll be available in July.
Yeah.
So keep an eye out for these. Let's see. I think the whole price letter a lot of times works against them. You always hear comments like X for a Grand Seiko. Yeah, I think it's a tricky situation, and part of it is that they wanted to kind of get away from, I think, the image of Seiko being too inexpensive, because they obviously make really high-end product, and at least in the US market, that was taking away from that higher product. Like, they had to work to get Grand Seiko to where it is. And now it's quite established, and I think at least among the enthusiasts that
absolutely
is gone. But
well, I think we forget a lot of the times that Grand Seiko has only been in the United States, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but like Grand Seiko has only been in the United States for about a decade. And it was a real challenge for them, as you said, when they came to the US. Like, people were like, I'm going to spend how much for a Seiko? Like, those are cheap watches. And so they did actually have to fight against that a bit. And, I have no issue with them. If they're going to make watches like this, I have no issue with it.
Yeah, no, 100%. Sorry, it's just, Sean says, what's the 6R51, no date 6R55? That might be correct, Sean. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, this is obviously a non-date watch. I wonder if putting a hole in that porcelain dial, it just presents an issue. But once again, I would have to go back and look at the other ones to see if they had that. I mean, although there's a hole in the center of the dial.
And they have porcelain dial watches with subdials and lots of things going on. So
but anyway, I feel like this watch feels right without a date.
Yeah.
So good call on that. All right, should we move on to our next topic? A total, I don't know, U-turn, if you will, or something, to the Gerard Perigo Deep Diver. We have a hands-on written by,
Oh yeah, this was me, wasn't it?
Yeah. Take us through this watch. This is quite the watch.
Yeah, I mean, this is. Look, I mean, it's no shock that a brand of any stripe would want to go back into their archive and pull out a compelling dive watch and remake it. What sets this apart is really that it's actually not in that lineage. It is really much more in keeping with the casquette that they released a few years ago. So this is a funky dive watch from the original version was introduced in 1969, but this version that they're reviving is from kind of the mid-70s, and it's very much in the vein of Doxa, these great weird divers from the 70s, and they just did an amazing job. It's a great watch. It wears great, it feels materially significant, and it makes sense in the context both of the Gerard Perigo, looking at watches like the casquette, and something the brand really emphasized was this is the real forerunner to the Laureato. And that's why they wanted to reintroduce this watch, is to kind of give some context to who the brand is now, or what the brand is now. Interesting.
How exactly is it the forerunner? Just in that it's like a sports watch lineage?
Even stuff, I mean, and it's subtle details, but if you put the whole lineage next to each other, things like the faceted bezel and the 14 faceted bezel that is now a hallmark of the Laureato. This is the first watch that Gerard Perigo, to my knowledge, used it on.
It is quite a bold watch. Yeah, I feel like it's one of the, like, if I didn't see that as Gerard Perigo on it, like, I would think that's one of those like kind of like random, like you're saying, like random 70s dive watch brands, Yenny or something like that, and like you find it on one of these cool like vintage sites that does more of the kind of obscure digging. It's interesting that it's part of this kind of high luxury line now, because Gerard Perigo is certainly like a luxury watch brand. And not to say that this isn't like a luxury watch, but it's not like, to me, at least visually, in the same, just genre as like their current like Laureato watches. But they're priced like it though.
They are priced like it. This watch, again, limited edition, 350 pieces, is priced at just over $15,000 US. Until later this week, it's an exclusive at Watches of Switzerland. After the 15th of this month, it opens up and will be available in other places. But it feels like a great 70s dive watch that just happened. You pick it up and it feels like you picked up a watch from the 70s that just happens to be perfectly preserved.
Okay, interesting.
And it's a collaboration with Bamford, and in that, what they've done is they've taken this version of the watch from the mid 70s and just ever so slightly redid the color blocking and kind of massaged it to make it feel a little more contemporary. They added orange lume and orange on the hands and markers, which obviously wouldn't have been possible in 1974, pre the invention of Luminova. And it's great because the color all feels a little bit more of a piece.
That the other model we're looking at right now, that is the original.
That is one of the originals. Okay. There is also a version of that same watch with a much more similar color blocking, but I was really taken by this particular vintage example. To the point when, you've done touch and feels, you go in, they really want you to focus on the watch they're showing you. And I kept going and picking up and playing with this vintage example.
Well, certainly like an unexpected release from Gerard Perigo, who I feel like have been on the quieter side of things in the last few years. They stick with their Laureato watches and they put them out, but there hasn't been, any like huge moments. They do have their incredible Constant Force Escapement, which they did something with, like, I think it might have been last year, but even that feels like didn't quite get the spotlight that maybe deserved, but it was just a different version of something that they had brought out a few years prior to that. So this is a great way, I guess, to just say, hey, we're here, we're having fun.
Yeah. I also think it's, the reality is it's 2025, and when a brand doesn't have a dive watch available, people comment on that. And it's sort of a damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I think it's interesting. We saw Zenith come back into the dive watch space last year. Gerard Perigo come back into the dive watch space this year. Feels like we're at a place where brands are recognizing that it's important to check certain boxes, especially if they have a historic connection to it.
Yeah, certainly. All right, well, actually, our next topic was going to be those Zenith watches. So let's just jump over to those. So Zenith has brought out, and these are new versions of existing watches, but the Defy Extreme in the Shadow style, which we have one here. You want to walk us through these watches as well?
Let's just say, just putting it out there, these are great. I don't think it's...
they're a lot of fun.
I actually think, so I got to spend time with both the original releases of the Extreme Diver and the Revival Diver over the course of the last year. And I came away super impressed by both offerings. I think I literally said in my review of the Revival that the only Revival watches I liked more were the Shadows. And now we get it. So it's basically, this is Zenith taking component parts that they've been working with and putting them together into something fantastic. Especially, I think with the Extreme Diver, it's a slightly more subtle update. That was already a titanium watch. That's really a change in case finishing and color. With the Revival Diver, it is a fundamental change in what the watch is and how it presents. And I think, the watch showed up here yesterday and it's been getting passed around today to as close to universal acclaim as I think any watch gets in this office.
No, that's fair. I mean, when the Extreme came in, the previous one, which you had reviewed.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a charm to that watch, and like it's unique, just design elements to it. It's extreme. Like it lives up to the name in a way that's kind of fun. But there were things about it that irked me, specifically like the date wheel on that one. It felt like something was off with it. I don't know. I mean, that's just me. But like overall, it was a cool watch, and I didn't get to see the previous version of this, so I didn't have the frame of reference. I have seen obviously some of the previous like Shadow watches, and they have that sort of 3-hand non-dive version of this, which has the ladder Shadow bracelet on it. And I remember when they came out with that, like maybe 2 years ago or something, at Watches and Wonders, it was sort of off to the side of their releases, and like you were saying before, like that was the watch I wanted to see. Yeah, like it was like, just keep giving me that back, because it was so cool. And this is like that on steroids, like quite literally. It's a very similar format watch, but it's turned into a tool watch. And yeah, it's just, there's like so much charm in this little package here. It's 37 millimeters, which 37 millimeters is like the ideal amount of millimeters I've discovered at all times. But I wouldn't actually think on a dive watch it would work so well, because it's fairly compact and you have a lot going on, but I don't know, that wore just incredibly well.
And it's both very compact and very thick. So on paper, and this is one of those things we always say, don't judge a watch on fit until you've actually seen it. This is a watch that on paper shouldn't work. It shouldn't be comfortable. And it really is. I mean, it fits great. It fits a huge number of wrists really well. But I think one of the issues with the standard steel version, or not an issue, but one of the things that was noticeable was it was pretty shiny. Like it caught eyes. There's a lot of facets on the case, so it reflects light. It's hard to ignore the watch. And just having the shadow treatment kind of knocks all that out. And so it makes it slightly, I mean, other than being very comfortable because it's titanium, it makes it more wearable visually, despite the vibrant color on the dial.
Yeah, I mean, that yellow, which is like verging on tennis ball yellow, like I feel like in person there's more green in it than at least it looks on monitors, where it looks almost like a bright lemon yellow. And yes, Smoko, it does have a 90s Extreme Surge or Mountain Dew aspect to it, which I think is part of what makes it great. It's like it's like it lives up to the sort of the name of these watches. Or I guess this one's not the Extreme, but it looks extreme. Yeah, no, it's super rad. Obviously, everything should be titanium. I think I've said that before. But yeah, it's like such a this is vintage done right. This is like a vintage 100%. Revival. Like I didn't get to see that Gerard Perigo before. It sounds like it's really well made, but like this is truly a watch that looks like it's from one era mixed with like the kind of contemporary codes, and it is super cool.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I would have been as on board with it if this was the first execution we'd seen of it. Really? I think there is something to giving us all the context of the watch through the initial release and then giving us the modern reinterpretation of it. It feels much more understandable and digestible. The other thing that's worth calling out is, we were just talking about the shadow treatment. We were talking about this morning. We were like, none of us could remember, is this a coating? Is this just, and it's just microblasting. Like it is just bead blasting. It's just a really great finish.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very cool. It's like, it looks like gunmetal gray. So it's like darker than you'd think you'd be able to get with just a finish. But yeah, no, that's exceptionally cool. Titanium, what can't it do, Before we leave these, so the Extreme was 12,300 and the Defy Revival 8,200.
Yeah.
I mean, not to compare things once again, but if you were to look at the previous watch, it's almost half the price of that previous watch. Also in-house movement, also a lot of pedigree, and yet still a very expensive watch. So don't get us wrong, but like this feels more in line with what a luxury dive watch should cost to me.
I think I would agree with that. I think it's also worth remembering that both of these Shadow editions are about $1,000 premium over the versions we saw last year. So you are paying for the Shadow treatment. It's absolutely worth it.
Yeah, I think that's worth it. 100%.
Especially on the Revival diver. Maybe less on the Extreme because that was already titanium to begin with.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, let's move on. Oh, wow, I really stacked the deck here. So next up, we have the J.N. Shapiro Infinity Series Pure. So I wrote this hands-on. They came to the office really for photography because there's another article being written, and I was like, we can't like have this around and I not write about it because it's ridiculous. J.N. Shapiro's don't just like show up in the office very often. I mean, literally, this was the first time and probably the last, who knows? But so, you know, for those who are not familiar, J.N. Shapiro, based in Los Angeles, like, I don't know, sort of the, like the king of the indie scene in America, or at least the high-end scene, because he's manufacturing a lot of things in the US. Famously, his Resurgence watch, which makes the claim of being like the only watch that can qualify as truly American-made by the current standard, which is all or virtually all components, which is a topic I could talk about at length, but because I think it's kind of absurd. But it's actually shout out to the collective. You should listen to their podcast with him because he does say that they do outsource some components, and they basically take the model of what like Hamilton would have done back in the day. So super specialized things need to come in. Anyway, the Infinity Series Pure is sort of a return to the entry point for the brand at $26,000. So by no means like an entry level, but compared to the $70K of the Resurgence, it's much more of a bargain. And it features a rose engine turned dial made in Los Angeles, hands that are also made in their LA shop out of rose gold or white gold, depending on the model. And then a La Joux movement, and then all the other components are outsourced. So that is how they're managing the price point of this. Having seen them in person, they are like exquisitely beautiful watches. 37 millimeters, I should mention. 37, like I said, it's like the magic number now. I mean, they're absolutely beautiful watches. You know, this engine turning that they do, which once again, they're not the only people who do engine turning by an extent, but in the US, it's like them, RGM, and maybe like a handful of other people doing very tiny one-off little projects. They have, though, their own pattern called the Infinity Weave. Joshua Shapiro developed this, and that is within the sub-dial there. So it's a basket weave within a basket weave. So every other basket weave is four tiny basket weaves.
I mean, it's... And I was lucky, I happened to come through the office for like 20 minutes on the day these were here. And I walked in the door and was immediately told, you have to see these two watches. And Devin was right. I needed to see these two watches. They're absolutely incredible in person. They're the rare, truly high-end watch that you don't actually need to have any of the context for to understand. They're just an objectively beautiful thing. Having more context only makes them more compelling. And frankly, I know these aren't the highest end. I know this is the entry point. The size is really good. These actually felt like maybe my favorite watches I've experienced from J.N. Shapiro, with admittedly limited experience.
I think I've seen two.
But they blew me away.
It's funny when I, honestly not knowing what was in the box that Zach was like, oh, we have J.N. Shapiro's here. I opened it up and kind of, my first reaction was like, oh, they look kind of almost underwhelming because they were smaller and they like than expected. And, you know, in my mind, a lot of these sort of neo-traditional style watches, you know, like Roger Smith, for example, like they're usually like 40 to 42 millimeters. They have these big movements in them. So seeing it kind of in this refined dress watch size kind of threw me. And also I had just the day before seen the new Naohito watches. And the Naohito watches, if you ever get a chance to see them in person, take that chance. They have like a heft to them that you don't expect. Because they're just like movement all the way through, and they're also 37 millimeters, once again, perfect. And so these were like just considerably like lighter. And so it's kind of like had this like, you know, you have this like luxury mass kind of like expectation. But then I spent time with them, you know, and wearing them, it's like, they're wearable. They're very comfortable, lovely watches, and they're just like super elegant. And, you know, I mean, they just really nailed the watch itself. The price point and all that, I mean, I think there's always conversations to be had. It's a competitive price point. I talked about some competitors in there. RGM being the most obvious because they're also American and do a lot of their manufacturing in America, and at a lesser price point than this. But you have a Le Joux movement, which also has the benefit of being probably fairly serviceable. So, I don't know. You can take it or leave it, basically. I have a feeling these watches are going to sell really quickly to fans of the brand, people who are waiting, people who missed out on the original Infinity series. There's only 18 of each, should mention that. So,
honestly, if they're not already all spoken for, I'd be surprised. They're exactly the kind of thing that gets snapped up and disappear, and then maybe one will pop up on a for sale something somewhere in 10 years, and we'll be like, oh yeah, that was a really good watch.
Yeah.
But it's a great reminder of what the brand is doing, and it's nice to see that they're not just pushing higher and higher up. They're focusing. It's like, no, we want to make watches. I mean, not that anyone can get 18 watches at nearly $30,000 a watch is not a mass market watch, but certainly, especially if you're someone who's been locked into the brand for a while, this does represent a more attainable entry point as the brand has started introducing some of the even more higher end stuff.
Yeah. No, certainly. Thanks for pointing that out, Smoko. Sorry, if I'm pronouncing that right. But yeah, there's a lecture online that he gave at the Horological Society of New York, which I haven't actually watched that myself, so I will go check that out too. But that sounds great. And by the way, if you guys have any questions or you want to know something specific, leave us a comment. We'll try to bring it up and take a look. Should we step away from 5-figure watches for a second?
Yeah, no, I think that's probably a reasonable.
Okay, let's over there.
But only for a minute.
Only for a minute. So this is a new introduction, the Heron Mirabel GMT. This was written by Elodie Townsend. This watch just honestly really caught my attention on the website. I like going to Worn and Wound myself and like seeing a watch. I'm like, oh, that's nice. This really just has that kind of like fun micro brand spirit to it that I think gets us all really excited. It's a very nice looking watch and a very affordable watch. So Heron is a Canadian brand founded in 2021. This is a GMT using the Miyota 9075 GMT movement. So, the Flyer GMT, try to resist calling it. True just kind of wants to come out, but it is sort of obnoxious to say. So a Flyer GMT obviously has this sort of nice 30s-esque sort of sector dial with Roman numerals designed to it. Guess what the size is? Actually, I have it on your document. It's 37.5 millimeter. I did not intend to have so many 37 millimeter things. I think this is just happening. Like, it's the gravity of 37.
37 or bust.
Yeah, 37 or bust. And it's priced at $690. So, I don't know. It's cool. What do you think of this one?
I mean, it's a really cool watch. It's one of those, like you, this is a watch I had no idea was coming. It's a brand I'd never heard of. And then the watch popped up on the site, and I went up, and the day I looked it up, I was like, that's pretty cool. Like, it's kind of funky. It's got
nice crown detail there.
Yeah, it's got all this great detail. It's got this wonderful, like, kind of C-shaped case that reminds me of some of the old Omega Genève stuff, but mixed with this really old school, like you said, 1930s dial, with one of my favorite affordable movements in it. I own a handful of watches with 9075s in them. I love it. It's such a fun, I love that complication has become accessible. And I love that this is a watch that puts that movement in something utterly unlike any other watch I'm aware of on the market. Like, I can't think of another affordable GMT watch that is anywhere in the aesthetic ballpark of this.
Yeah, no, I mean, offhand, I can't either. It's a very elevated design. It's very balanced. I love sector dials, period, because if they're done well, they just like have an inherent balance to them. It's like a trick to balancing something and putting it in, concentric rings like this. Also, shout out and bonus points to anyone who uses a crosshair, because I just love crosshair dials. So yeah, I get what you're saying. It sort of mixes this like refinement with this very cool movement that still relatively new. I mean, it's probably like 2 years now or something.
Yeah. and hasn't been overly adopted. I mean, it's starting to pop up in more watches, but it's one of those ones where I'm like, every so often you still see some of the other, and I don't want to disparage collar GMTs because I actually do really like them. They have a place, but every so often it pops up in a watch where you're like, well, that really should be a flyer GMT. And it's cool to see this. I mean, I'm a strong proponent. I really feel like more GMT watches should lean kind of into the dressier side of things.
Yeah, it's not like an inherently dressy complication. Obviously, like coming from the Rolex world, like you kind of like associate it with pilots' watches and dive watches and everything. And I mean, there's plenty of dressy dual time watches, but it does tend to go towards a sport watch versus the dressy watch. But I feel like the travel dress watch, as somebody who doesn't go on adventure trips, but goes to Geneva for things a few times a year, it's like a dressy dual time watch is actually more practical.
Well, I mean, anytime, and if I do go on an adventure trip, those are the trips that I don't need to think about multiple time zones. Those are the trips where I get there and I'm there.
Right.
So something like this, this would be a great watch to throw on for, I don't know, watches and wonders, and just have something dressy since you're wearing dressier clothes the whole time anyway. You're not fighting against a big bezel. And what's the thickness on this?
This one's actually, so it's 11.8 with the crystal. So that's pretty thin. Some of the first group of 9075 watches that came out were pretty thick. And I think it's less because the movement itself is thick and more because the hand stack is kind of tall.
Yeah.
So to like compensate for that, and it seems like they did a good job.
Yeah, I mean the first 9075 watch I got was the Boulder that you guys did.
Yeah, that's a thick one.
And that's it's a great watch. It's really fun. I wear it all the time. It's not thin.
Yeah. It has an internal bezel too.
Yeah, I mean it's a great.
Yeah. I like that one. It's.
I wear that watch a lot.
you can hammer nails with that one. Well, so there's before moving on, we'll take one more and then we'll take a call, which will be fun. There's a good question here from Noctua Watch Corporation. What are your thoughts on Le Jouperet movements in general, overpriced Citizen or Swiss competition? I think Le Jouperet is doing really cool things that kind of are kind of forcing other brands to kind of make some changes. So the G100 movement that came out, which does bear some resemblance to Miyota 9015s, but from an engineering perspective, I can say, I don't know if they're actually similar, but they have an extended power reserve, and now we're seeing more extended power reserve movements come out from some other brands, so Sellita and Soprod. People are trying to get up to that, whatever it is, 72, like the 3-day mark, which is like a new standard, so that's awesome. But then they do have some higher end movements, that Le Jouperet that was in the Jan Shapiro actually has a 90-hour power reserve. I should have said that before, but it's like a very thin movement. So, that watch came in at 9 millimeters, but it's a 90-hour power reserve. Then they also have an 8-day power reserve movement, which some of those robot watches I actually mentioned that we now have the shop have, which, I mean, that's very uncommon, especially for something that like a brand can get into. Most of the real extended power reserve movements are in-house and kind of kept in-house. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have any experience with? What do you feel about LGP?
I think there's a couple points in their favor. One, I mean, for any of us to pretend that different movement makers don't kind of crib off each other's homework is naive. We've been seeing. I mean, we've been seeing it over decades and decades and decades. Someone comes up with something over the course of years. The intellectual property kind of blends together between all these places. I think what Le Jouperet is doing really well is that they're working very closely with the brands who want to use their movements. And I think especially as we've seen places like ETA, like kind of in waves restrict how and when you can get access to their movements. Seeing a group like Le Jouperet who's really committed to like not only providing movements, but working with brands to make sure that the movements work for them is fantastic. So there's a place for that. G100's a great movement. I've had watches that have it. I've had no issues with it. I've also had plenty of watches with terrible movements that I never thought about. So I'd rather a brand work with a movement that I know is going to work.
Yeah, that's fair. I basically, I mean, I wouldn't see them as, certainly inferior anyway to Sellita or Soprod or ETA. And I think they have some movements that seem to stand a little bit above and are, more almost approaching the Valshir sort of territory. They also brought back the, Pizu 7001 with the D100, which is like one of the great little dress watch movements that disappeared for a while, and now you're seeing it come back and people are able to make ultra thin little dress watches again. So happy about that.
Yeah. No, I think, all in. It's just, I think it's good to have more movement makers who are focused on making movements that are accessible to brands.
Yeah, 100%. All right. We'll do one more. I'm sorry, going high end again. I can make the news, we just...
No. I mean, we're at that time of year where we're in a weird, not slump, but definitely it's a slightly quieter time, and a lot of brands are trying to make noise. Yeah. And this next watch definitely made noise.
Yeah. All right. So next up is two watches by Moser. So they introduced the Alpine Motorsport. What do you even call these? So they're both Streamliners made for the F1 Alpine Motorsports team. And for the first time, they made an AnaDigi watch, which obviously is sort of the, gets the spotlight here because it's very unexpected and kind of crazy, but it's paired with a pretty wild skeletonized Agenor chronograph as well, which is more sort of classic Moser. So I don't know. A, what do you think of these? And B, I don't know, share any details about them? Yeah.
I mean, let's just start. What's fun about these is these are watches we get to judge unabashedly without ever having to back it up with our own wallets, or these are just, they're so beyond, not just because they're expensive, but because these are watches that are gone. The Alpine, the Moser Alpine collaboration has been a huge success, and if they're not all sold, which they may or may not be, they're all out there in the world and being used and interacted with. So I think these are really, really cool. I actually think the chronograph, not the AnaDigi, is the best of the three Alpine watches we've seen so far.
They're being tourbillons, right? The previous years
have been cylindrical tourbillons with sapphire dials in pink and blue, which fun, not really for me. These feel much more directly inspired by motorsports watches and motorsports in general. Mm-hmm. I love the Alpine blue case finish. I like that it's a skeletonized dial, but it's not overly skeletonized. It's still very legible. And that you get it with an awesome AnaDigi watch is just a cherry on top.
Yeah. Yeah, the Streamliner watches are interesting. I feel like I'm less taken with them than other people. And my favorite part of them is actually the bracelet, which is not here, unfortunately. Would have loved to see that bracelet in blue. But those rubber straps look perfectly nice. But I'm a huge fan of the Agengraph or whatever. It's such a crazy cool movement.
Yeah.
They use it, Ming uses it. Singer uses it, and it's very customizable to how you want it. Singer does the most kind of customization, but here you have a central second counter, a central minute counter, and as you can see, I believe that's actually the rotor. So the rotor is not on the back of the watch; it's in the sort of the middle of it, or towards the top, and then there's a module coming through the middle, which is nuts. So it's spinning around a module. So yeah, I mean, it's like totally nutso movement, and then the blue steel treatment. Yeah.
It's great.
I don't know. I guess there's not Ben Stiller doesn't have a trademark on that, but blue steel.
Yeah. Pretty good. I mean, I think it's what's interesting about it is the first pair of collaborations between Alpine and Moser came together so quickly. I think at some point I was quoted as they basically had 3 months to develop the first Alpine by Alpine Moser cylindrical tourbillon. Mm-hmm. So they were slightly limited in the scope of what that watch could be. This feels like the first real example of what this collaboration was always meant to be. This feels specific. This feels directly inspired by the race team, and it feels like a step slightly outside of the norm for Moser while still feeling very true to both brands that are involved in it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And we're also not trying to avoid the AnaDigi watch. I think the AnaDigi watch is very cool, if totally unexpected, and I don't know if it should exist, but it is super cool. So they do have like a proper Moser dial on that. And I think something you have to try and picture is the Digi screen off, which they don't actually have, we don't have an image of that, but it's not always on. So you have this sort of like minimalist Moser dial with an offset dial. So it could look really elegant that. And it's actually powered. They worked with a company called Seiko, which I was very surprised to see. And it's very cool. We've written about them before. But Seiko is a Swiss smartwatch maker. But I've reviewed one before. I know smartwatch, but not in the sense of Apple. It's not a digital screen. Yeah. They're all analog. They track, health steps, all that kind of stuff. The quantified self or whatever you call that. But what's really interesting about them is that they have their own movement. And that movement is sort of like a Seiko Kinetic, but it's entirely their own technology. It's not Seiko Kinetic, but it has a rotor and that charges the cells. So wearing that basically powers your watch. So you get closer to the experience of a mechanical watch, but it is an electronic, smartwatch device, and it does sync with your phone. So they did the technology behind this, which I think it's just really cool to see. It's not powered by Android or something.
Yeah. And honestly, we haven't talked about this watch as much as if I were actually to choose one of the two to personally own, this speaks to me far more than the chronograph. This excites me on a deep 6-year-old level. It makes me giddy. I love a digital watch. I love an AnaDigi watch. And I like that this it feels like it balances, like the other watch, it balances Moser and the needs of Alpine very nicely. I think what's a slight challenge with this watch, obviously, is it's only available as a basically add-on or a throw-in with the chronograph, or it's available to anyone who bought the previous two cylindrical tourbillons. So it's not a watch that, at least primary market, you can buy.
It's still pretty ambitious. There's 200 of those sets priced at $70K. So I guess Moser's got a pretty good customer base there. And then they're making an additional 300 of these for the previous owners, but they don't actually say what that costs or whatever.
No, and that's not a number that we're probably ever going to find out.
Yeah. All right, we think we got Zack Kazan. Okay, we're working on that. Okay. So we told him we'd bring him on at 5:30. Time flies when you're live, guys. So we'll get back to that in a second. Does anyone have any questions about what we've talked about so far, or any other new releases? Let's see what we got here. Can you bring the Wind Up Fair to Boston and LA? I mean, theoretically we could, but at the moment we're not.
Boston's pretty close to New York. Just,
Yeah.
I go New York.
Why those two? Are you in Boston and LA, but not San Francisco and New York?
Wind Up's worth it. Just it's a 4-hour train ride from Boston. Just come down in the morning, go back in the evening. It's a great day.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's see. DB says, conceptually, the idea of a driver's watch for F1 drivers that aren't even allowed to wear a watch while driving, that leaves me scratching my head. That's a good point.
I mean...
But F1 watches, it's such a thing. Obviously, and this is the year for it, right? With IWC and everything.
I do think it's interesting. We've both been enthusiasts for a long time, and I feel like when I first started being aware of watches, and really even by that point it was dying down, but there was a point in the early 2000s when F1 was so central to watches, and it kind of went away for a while, and it's now coming back in a pretty big way. There used to be Formula One edition Omegas and everything, and now it's kind of nice to have it back.
Yeah. All right, we are ready to bring Zack Kazan, managing editor of Warner Wound, onto the show.
Hey,
Zack, there you are. How you doing, Zack?
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing?
We're doing good. Thanks for joining us from
Hello,
Concord.
Internet. Hello, YouTube. Fantastic to be here.
Yeah, I feel like you always welcome me on the podcast, but now it's switch. This is not a podcast technically. It's somehow. This is because we're live, because we're looking at a monitor. It's different. Yeah.
The tables have really turned. It's very
yeah.
something.
All right, well, it took us a lot longer to get to this part of the show, still tweaking things. So, Zach, we wanted to talk to you about a couple of pieces that you have written the last few weeks that were really fantastic. First was about watch propaganda, and I know this is kind of like a meme thing, but it's still a great topic. So, what watch propaganda are you not buying?
Well, there were a couple of things that I pointed out in the article, and I was reviewing that article while I was in the green room, waiting to come on and join you guys. I realized that the theme throughout was just like the propaganda I'm not falling for is anyone telling me or anyone like how to collect. So like the idea that everyone needs a Speedmaster, I think is very silly. The idea that the only vintage watches worth buying are ones that are like completely original and untouched under every circumstance, I think is like not super fun or productive. So I guess I'm just like not on board with kind of like know-it-alls like us like telling people like what they should and shouldn't like choose to spend their money on, because there's a lot of that. I think if you step back and look at the watch hobby and the watch industry, I think a lot everyone's telling someone to buy something, and ultimately it's an extremely personal and emotional decision. So that's sort of writ large the propaganda I'm not falling for.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that is essentially the like underlying theme behind that, and that obviously makes sense, I think, for you, Zach, and some points that I obviously agree with. I feel like there was a while in the early days when we used to like go to meetups, like in like 2013 or something, and it was sort of like, you don't have a sub, you don't have a speedy, get out of here kind of a feeling. Like you're not a watch collector. And I mean, I think that has changed a lot, especially just because of like the breadth of brands. But you definitely hear that kind of like, and I feel like it's like you have to have a Speedmaster, or if it's like a meters first 5512 or something like that. The thing with Speedmaster, and I'm not saying you have to have one, but I feel like it's a really good watch to have tried. And there's a certain like logic to it too. Like I never owned a Submariner until recently, and I inherited it, and so I have like a mid 1980s Submariner now, and like I get it now. You know what I mean? I kind of get why you really want one, or why they're so nice. Certainly don't have to have it, but it's like it's so good, you know?
Yeah, I think these watches, the reason people, I think, and they don't always express it well, the reason people tell you should own them is because they are a really good baseline by which to compare other stuff. Whether that means ownership is necessary, whether you can just experience it and kind of figure it out is one thing. But I do think you're getting it's like, okay, yeah, at the end of the day, a basic 5-digit like black Note 8 sub is a really, really great dive watch. But I'm with you, Zach. Like that doesn't mean you need to own any of these watches.
Yeah.
It is worth experiencing them and understanding them.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of way it's like they're like the platonic forms from which other things are sort of referenced against. So yeah, kind of understanding that is helpful, but not necessary.
Yeah, I mean, like I owned multiple Speedmasters before I figured out that like the Speedmaster is not a watch that I really have any desire to own. Like it took me a while to kind of like to figure that out. So like in the end, it was valuable, I guess, to to have a Speedmaster, in my collection, if only to kind of like further define my taste, over time. So yeah, but I think just when someone says to you, at a meetup, like, you've got to own a Speedmaster, you've got to own a sub. You're not a real collector if you don't, own one of these things. That's sort of, I think, a ridiculous idea, on its face. So
yeah, no, for sure. Another point that I really like that you made here also is the celebrity ambassador thing. I feel like that was made for me. I feel like I've been very vocal. Also, Zach, in my I don't know, my negative thoughts about these things, resistance
you really
to
don't
it.
like celebrity ambassadors. Like that's I feel like I even like wrote an editorial a while back, kind of like defending the idea of them, and it's like sort of like a window like into the hobby for like a certain type of collector or a certain type of watch person. But I don't know, there's something about like the time we're living in, right now, like summer 2025, and, like seeing these like celebrities on the red carpet and like like just all the emails that we all get, talking about all these celebrities wearing these watches that have been chosen for them. There's just something about it that just doesn't feel quite right. It's certainly not, very authentic. And I'm just kind of tired of it. And it's become sort of like a game, I think, for some of these brands to, like place watches on certain people. And like the Daniel Craig thing at the Olympics last year felt like sort of a last straw for me. Just it was kind of just like, it's such an obvious sort of like, type of this weird guerrilla marketing. It just really turned me off. So
yeah, that's a new thing to like leak through a celebrity.
Or even a video game now.
Oh, really? What was leaked in a video game?
Apparently, they're now saying like, oh my God, the new Omega Seamaster chronograph was in the trailer for the new Bond video game.
Wow.
And it's like,
okay, I have to look that up. I also feel it's kind of like lazy type of marketing. It's like you get a brand to a certain point where you have enough money and reach that you can just do that it sort of stops you from having to think about like real storytelling anymore. So I don't know. I have a lot of reasons not to like it, to be honest. But probably want to stay in some good graces with a handful of these brands.
Yeah. I do think a positive example of this sort of watch placement, I don't want to say ambassadorship, but Zach, we've talked a bit about Brady Corbet wearing the Lorca watch on the awards trail for the Brutalist last year, which was just, it's a brand he had a personal connection to that he liked sharing the story of, and was also pretty open about the fact that like he was probably going to have to give the watch back.
Oh, interesting.
And it's just like, it's cool to be able to wear something like this in this context, and being that open and honest about it, especially for a small brand like that wouldn't be able to place a watch on a Daniel Craig, I think was the right version of it. Yeah,
that's interesting. I didn't know Oh, go ahead, Zach.
I was gonna say, like, I agree. I think that's great, and that's like that to me is something like totally outside of the idea of celebrity ambassador. Like, that's just a guy who has a friend in the watch industry and wanted to wear his watch, during a important time in his life. So I think that's a really cool story. Seeing Brady Corbet wearing that Lorca.
Yeah, and I feel like it's also worth like an asterisk that I'm not opposed to celebrities wearing watches. You know what I mean? Like somebody, like a celebrity who goes out and buys their own watch and is passionate about watches is just as cool as anybody else is passionate about watches, and has a microphone, so sometimes they can talk about them. We had a great article with Geddy Lee about his watch collection a while ago. Shout out to David Bader for writing that one, bass player from Rush, if you don't know. And he's just like he's a watch nerd with really good taste in watches. All right, Zach, we're coming up to an hour, so let's go on to your next article. And so we kind of referred to this earlier when we were talking a bit about the Presage, but you read a great article about some new releases, but I feel like the real point of it was less about the releases and more about sort of the state of Seiko in media and maybe in the enthusiast culture right now. So what was your hypothesis there?
Yeah, so these watches are the Seiko 5 Sports SKX series, which is not a new series of watches, but they just came out with this this quartet of watches that are kind of like made to really evoke the classic sort of like SKX models that were like very important in the watch community and still continue to be pretty important to collectors that have been discontinued now for several years. And these watches came out, and there were a handful of publications that wrote about them, but not many. And there just wasn't like a ton of fanfare around them. I just thought that was weird, considering they're using that like SKX language, which is like, that's still a very important, kind of product to watch enthusiasts. Seiko's an important brand to watch collectors and watch enthusiasts and to watch media. And I just like hadn't like seen a lot of activity on these watches or conversation about them. And that just struck me as weird, because when I started doing this in like 2019 is when I started writing about watches. Like Seiko was everything, and like there was no Seiko stone unturned. It sort of like drove watch internet, in a lot of ways, and it just kind of like made me realize it's something that we've talked about this before, in a number of contexts, but like times have really changed, and like Seiko isn't like the center of watch enthusiast culture in the same way that they were in certainly like 2019, 2020, and even earlier than that. So yeah, the article kind of like just sort of like touches on that and discusses that, and just sort of like acknowledges that there's sort of this like void, that Seiko left at that like affordable price point that the Seiko 5 Sports has not filled. And we talked about that on the podcast this week a little bit as well.
Yeah, no, it's, it was something that we'd sort of been talking about internally, that it felt like Seiko had sort of fallen off a little bit. And, for me personally, it was sort of after they had a real resurgence at the like $1,000 to $1,400 price point with the Prospect Divers, which were super popular for a while, all those reissues, but then they could only do those reissues so many times. And it just felt like they were going back to the well. So like it felt like the culture was changing around it. And I feel like you just found this moment that kind of perfectly sort of exemplified it, because yeah, this should be a cult hit. And it should be like something that, a few years ago, everybody would have been rampantly talking about, running around and running out and trying to buy, just because it's so fun, and it, brings back this collector's, like an enthusiast's icon, but it just wasn't. So yes, Mac Lobster, it is certainly that the competition is much greater than it used to be. Mac Lobster, that's a good name.
Yeah, and I also think Seiko found itself also slightly caught in the middle, because they discontinued the SKX, they brought in the SPBs, which I feel like those were such a huge moment for Seiko. And then also in a weird way, like for as much as we all still love dive watches and things, there is sort of a desire for something different right now. I'm seeing a lot more entry-level customers looking for things that are slightly dressier, slightly less toolish. And there was a good run where what Seiko was doing was also really aligned with that core entry want. And maybe that's diversified a bit. It's not that people don't still want great affordable dive watches, but they also want great affordable other stuff. And Seiko kind of, when they launched this new Seiko 5 line, they were like, great, we're going to do this new dive watch and this new field watch. And then they kind of left it sitting there and didn't push as much in other directions. That maybe that's part of the problem.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think their biggest success to me is just their very affordable GMTs that they have in that collection of both the field watch and the dive format, if you will. But yeah, they're doing some interesting things right now. That Presage is a nice step, I think, in the right direction. I just saw there's other new watches that have come out since we kind of haven't quite caught up with the
Seiko Jaws watch is we'll have a story on that tomorrow. But that's kind of fun. I don't know if that's going to be like a big enthusiast hit or whatever. But like they're still doing like interesting things. I did not have a Jaws watch on my bingo card this week. So.
Yeah, no, and it's going back to that turtle, which also I don't know when it was, like 6-7 years ago, was like the great watch. We all got them. Like I feel like everyone in the office had those when they first came out. I still have mine, and mixing that with Jaws is a lot of fun. Although shout out Alsta. I'm sorry you missed that one.
Yeah, I also think I think we're gonna see. I think Seiko may be quiet right now. The idea that Seiko is dead, never to be revived as an enthusiast brand is,
no one's saying that.
It's going to be, watch us get off the air tonight, and then next week there's like the best Seiko dive watch in years, and we're all talking about it, and we all own one. And, it all comes back around.
Yeah, for sure. They need a chronometer spec movement in the under 2K. That's my sticking point. Well, I don't know if there's much else to say. We talked about it a lot on the podcast. So, Zack, thank you for joining us on this episode 104 of A Week in Watches. I'm sure we'll talk very soon. I don't know how quite to say goodbye, but
thanks for having me, guys. I'll sign off, and I appreciate you having me on the live A Week in Watches. This is fun. I was watching kind of like as I was waiting to come on, so you guys did a great job. This is a fun format. So,
well, thank you.
Having me on.
Yeah, we will talk to you on a future episode as well.
Sounds good.
And thank you for everyone who has joined us and commented along the way. We hope you like this new format. I think it's a lot of fun. Obviously, it's pretty easy to talk about watches for an hour and 5 minutes, which is longer than we were supposed to. So yeah, it's been a good time. Griffin, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right, and we'll let everyone know when the next episode is coming, but probably about 2 weeks. Like and subscribe if you haven't, and we will see you soon.